What would you do if a neighborhood board tried to steal your family's 150-year-old home with fake fines? One man didn't back down, and the HOA instantly regretted crossing him. Imagine living in a house that has stood for a century and a half. Every wooden beam has soaked up the laughter, the prayers, the struggles, and the victories of the generations before you. That's what Reginald Porter, a 62-year-old retired machinist, felt every morning when he walked out onto the creaking porch of his home in Savannah, Georgia. For him, this place wasn't simply real estate. It was a piece of his family's soul, carved into the landscape of the South. The house was built in the 1870s by his great-grandfather, who had worked tirelessly in a foundry until he could buy the land outright. Over the years, the family painted and repainted those walls, repaired the roof after hurricanes, and replanted the magnolia tree that shaded the front yard. Each fix, each addition, wasn't just maintenance. It was an act of preservation. Reginald's father often told him, "This house is our anchor. No matter what storms hit us out there, we stand because it stands." Those words stayed with him. After his father passed, Reginald knew it was his duty to keep the home alive, not as a museum, but as a living testament to survival and dignity. He'd worked decades in a machine shop in Macon, his hands scarred and calloused, saving carefully to maintain the house. On weekends, he'd repaint shutters or replace floorboards, always humming while he worked. He wasn't flashy, didn't chase after luxury. To him, wealth was in being able to sit on that porch at sunset, sip his coffee, and know that 4 generations of his blood had done the same. Neighbors often slowed down when passing his property. The house had a weathered charm, the kind you couldn't buy with modern architecture. Tourists sometimes took photos when walking down the block. Reginald didn't mind. He'd even wave, proud to show what his family built long before historic preservation became a buzzword. But pride, as he would learn, sometimes paints a target. The subdivision where his house stood had changed drastically over the years. What used to be a community of long-time families slowly shifted as developers bought up parcels and young professionals moved in. With them came the Homeowners Association, a board eager to stamp uniformity on every property under their authority. Lawn heights had to match, fences had to be identical, and paint colors had to be approved. For some, it brought order. For others, it felt like control. Reginald had never cared for that kind of oversight. His house predated the HOA by over a century, and he figured that gave it an exemption. After all, how could a group formed in the 1990s dictate rules to a home that had survived Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and every hurricane the Atlantic had thrown at Savannah? Still, he kept things tidy. His grass was cut, his porch swept. He wasn't the type to let a place fall apart. But then came the notices. At first, small ones. A letter claiming his shutters were not in compliance because their color didn't match the approved palette. Another citing that his driveway was too wide for the association's standards. Reginald chuckled at them at first, thinking it was all some clerical mistake. His house wasn't even built to their designs. Why should he be bound by them? He ignored the first couple of letters, but more followed, each one carrying a sharper tone, each one threatening fines if he didn't comply. Soon, the amounts listed at the bottom of the page grew higher. The first real clash between Reginald Porter and the Homeowners Association didn't happen over mail. It happened face-to-face, under the fluorescent lights of a crowded HOA meeting at the community center on Whitaker Street. The folding chairs were lined up in rows, neighbors fanning themselves with copies of the meeting agenda. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant. At the front of the room sat Linda Haverford, the HOA president, a woman in her late 50s with sharp features and a voice that could cut through chatter like a knife. She adjusted her glasses, tapped her pen against the table, and announced in a clipped tone, "Next item on the agenda, property at 1428 Magnolia Lane." Reginald straightened in his chair. That was his home. He raised his hand before she could continue. "That's mine." "What seems to be the problem now?" Linda's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Porter, your shutters are painted a shade of green that does not comply with the approved HOA color scheme. Additionally, Your driveway exceeds the width permitted under our regulations. These issues must be corrected within 30 days, or fines will continue to accrue." Reginald leaned forward, his voice calm but steady. "Mrs. Haverford, my house is 150 years old. Those shutters have been green longer than this HOA has existed. And that driveway? It's been the same width since my grandfather poured it with his own hands in the 1940s. You can't possibly expect me to change history just to fit some rule you came up with 30 years ago." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some neighbors glanced at each other uncomfortably, while others smirked as though enjoying the confrontation. Linda pursed her lips. "Rules are rules, Mr. Porter." The association was created to maintain standards. Without standards, property values decline. If you want to be part of this community, you must comply. Reginald shook his head slowly. "Part of this community?" "My family built half of this block before some of these houses were even thought of. If anything, this community is part of my family's story, not the other way around." Gasps and low whispers filled the room. Linda's cheeks flushed. She wasn't used to being challenged. She lifted the gavel from the table and struck it once. "Order. The fines stand. You have 30 days to correct the issues. Meeting adjourned." People began shuffling out, but a few lingered, whispering near the coffee table. One neighbor, a middle-aged man named Peter Rawlins, patted Reginald on the shoulder as he passed. "Tough spot, Porter. HOA's been on a power trip for years, but be careful. They don't like losing." Reginald gave a polite nod, but said nothing. His mind was racing. He left the meeting with a sour taste in his mouth, the kind that comes when you know something isn't just unfair. It's personal. Over the next few weeks, the pressure intensified. More envelopes appeared in his mailbox, each stamped with the HOA's logo, each demanding larger sums. He tried ignoring them, but the numbers on the balance sheet grew like weeds. $1,500, then $2,200, then $3,600. One Saturday morning, while Reginald was patching a section of the fence behind his house, he heard footsteps crunching on the gravel. He turned to see Linda approaching, clipboard in hand. "Good morning, Mr. Porter," she said curtly. "I wanted to do a quick inspection while I was nearby." He put down his hammer. "Inspection? You don't have any right to walk onto my property uninvited." She smiled faintly. "Actually, under the association's bylaws, I do. And what I see is a fence that appears to be over the maximum allowed height by at least 6 inches. Another violation, Reginald's patience snapped. "Lady, this fence has been here since 1972. Nobody complained about it until you walked over with your clipboard. You're not protecting property values, you're targeting me." Linda's tone turned icy. "If you feel that way, Mr. Porter, perhaps this isn't the right community for you." He stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "This house is my family's blood. I'm not going anywhere." For a split, but what he didn't realize yet was that this fight was bigger than fines, bigger than rules. It was about power, and the HOA president wasn't going to back down without making him suffer first. The next month became a grind for Reginald Porter. Each day felt like a tug of war between his will to stand tall and the constant blows from the HOA. Letters arrived like clockwork, stamped with the same heavy black ink, all demanding payment. The tone shifted from "please comply" to "final notice," until every envelope felt like a punch to the chest. One Saturday, as he sorted his mail at the kitchen counter, he counted 4 separate envelopes, all from the HOA. He tore one open with his calloused fingers. "Outstanding balance $4,200. His hand trembled slightly. He hadn't seen numbers like that since paying off his mortgage years ago. He muttered aloud, "How does green paint and a driveway cost more than a year's wages?" The magnolia tree outside swayed under the savannah breeze, but it offered no comfort this time. That afternoon, Reginald decided to confront the issue head-on. He marched down to the HOA office, a small brick building near Forsyth Park. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, and behind the desk sat Janice Monroe, the association's secretary, a woman in her 40s with a polite but tired expression. "Morning, Janice," Reginald said, keeping his tone steady. "I need to talk to Linda about these fines. They don't make sense. Janice gave a sympathetic look. She's in a meeting, Mr. Porter. But I can schedule you for— No, he cut her off. I'm not scheduling anything. I'll wait. Minutes later, the door to the back office swung open and Linda Haverford stepped out, clutching a folder. Her sharp heels clicked against the tile. She spotted Reginald and sighed. Mr. Porter, what brings you here? He held up the stack of letters. This nonsense, $4,000 in fines, for shutters and a driveway that's been the same for decades? Linda tilted her head, her voice dripping with condescension. If you had complied from the beginning, the balance wouldn't have grown. It's simple math. Reginald's jaw tightened. It's not math. It's harassment. Linda crossed her arms. Harassment? Mr. Porter, the rules apply to everyone equally. He stepped closer. Then why am I the only one getting fined for things that were never problems before? The room went quiet for a moment. Even Janice glanced up nervously from her desk. Linda adjusted her glasses and said flatly, If you can't afford to live here under the rules, perhaps you should consider selling. Reginald let out a bitter laugh. Sell my family's home? To who? You? One of your friends? Number. That house isn't leaving my bloodline. Linda's smile was thin and cold. Then prepare for consequences. She turned and walked back into her office, the door shutting with a sharp click. On his walk home, Reginald felt the weight of every step. He could hear the whispers in the neighborhood. A couple watering their flowers went silent as he passed. A man jogging slowed down, eyes flicking toward him before speeding up again. It felt as though the HOA had turned the entire block into silent enforcers. The pressure wasn't just financial anymore, it was psychological. Each glance from a neighbor carried judgment. Each envelope in the mailbox was a reminder that he was being squeezed. One night, unable to sleep, he called his niece, attorney Monique Ellis, who lived 2 hours away in Augusta. Uncle Reggie, she said, her voice warm but concerned. You sound tired. What's going on? He explained everything, the letters, the meeting, the Lien threats. When he finished, silence filled the line. Then Monique spoke firmly. Uncle, they're setting you up. Can't just rewrite history and force it on you. This isn't about compliance. It's about control. And I'm not letting them take your house. Reginald exhaled, his chest loosening for the first time in weeks. You think you can help? I know I can, Monique replied. First, I'll review their bylaws. Then I'll pull public records. If they've done this to you, chances are they've done it to others. We'll build a case. He rubbed his forehead, relief washing over him. You've always had your daddy's fire in you. He'd be proud. I learned it from both of you, Monique said softly. Hold steady. I'll be there this weekend. That call gave him a glimmer of hope. But the next morning, hope was tested again. A bright orange notice was nailed to his front door. Delinquent balance. Lien pending. Reginald stood there on the porch, the paper fluttering in the wind, his stomach churning. He pulled it down slowly and whispered to himself, They really want this house. But he wasn't alone anymore, because Monique was on her way, and her arrival would turn this neighborhood feud into something much bigger than the HOA ever expected. By the time Monique Ellis pulled her silver sedan into the driveway on Saturday morning, the orange notice still clung stubbornly to Reginald's front door, like a scarlet letter for the whole block to see. She stepped out of the car, her tailored blazer catching the light, and walked up the porch steps with a determined stride. Her uncle was waiting on the porch, a steaming mug of coffee in hand. He looked worn, his shoulders heavy with weeks of stress, but his eyes brightened when he saw her. Moni, he said with a tired smile, using the nickname he'd given her as a child. You don't know how good it is to see you. She hugged him tightly. It's good to see you too, Uncle. Now show me that notice. He handed her the crumpled sheet he'd pulled from the door earlier. She scanned it quickly, her brow furrowing. Lien proceedings? Already? They moved fast. That's what I've been saying, Reginald replied. Feels like they had this planned from the jump. Monique looked up from the page, her tone sharp. A lien isn't a warning, Uncle. It's a threat. If they record this, they can move toward foreclosure. We need to shut this down immediately. Reginald exhaled heavily, rubbing his temple. I don't have that kind of money, Moni. $4,000 today. Maybe 5 next week. They're bleeding me dry. Monique placed a hand on his arm. I'm not asking you to pay. I'm asking you to fight inside. At the old oak dining table that had seen countless family meals, Monique laid out her laptop, notepad, and a thick binder she carried everywhere. She was meticulous, jotting down every detail as her uncle recounted the letters, the meetings, the visit from Linda Haverford. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair. I'll need copies of every notice. Emails, letters, all of it. And Uncle, don't throw away a single scrap of paper from them moving forward. Reginald chuckled dryly. Good thing I don't throw anything away. Whole stacks in that shoebox over there. She opened the box, flipping through neatly folded envelopes. Perfect. This is our ammunition. Later that afternoon, Monique insisted they attend the HOA's open office hours. The building was quiet, the front desk manned only by Janice Monroe, who greeted them with a nervous smile. Back again, Mr. Porter? She asked cautiously. This time, I brought my niece, Reginald said. She's an attorney. Monique offered her card with a polite but firm smile. I'll need copies of the association's bylaws and all records of fines issued in the last 5 years. Janice blinked. That's a lot of paperwork. I'm aware, Monique replied, her tone steady. I'll wait. A door creaked open in the back, and Linda Haverford emerged, her expression stiffening at the sight of Monique. What's going on here? Monique stood. I'm here on behalf of my uncle, Mr. Porter. We're requesting access to the association's records, as required by Georgia law. I trust you won't make this difficult. Linda's lips curled into a faint smile. You think you can stroll in here and tell us how to run our community? Monique didn't flinch. I don't need to think. I know the law, and the law says you can't selectively target homeowners with fabricated violations. You've overstepped. Reginald crossed his arms. She's not going to let you bully me, Linda. Those days are over. For a moment, silence hung thick in the air. Then Linda laughed softly. You want records? You'll get them, but you won't like what you find. She turned to Janice. Make the copies. As Linda disappeared back into her office, Monique whispered to her uncle. That smile tells me she knows exactly what we'll find. And that's good. It means she's worried. Back at the house that evening, Monique spread the copied records across the table. Her eyes darted from page to page, her pen circling numbers. Uncle, look at this. They fined you $1,200 for a driveway. But 3 houses down, the Clarks widened theirs last year. No fines. The following week, the atmosphere in the neighborhood shifted. Word travels fast in communities bound by an HOA, and whispers about Reginald Porter's niece, the attorney who was digging into the association's records, spread like wildfire. Some neighbors waved to him a little more warmly than before, while others turned their heads, as if acknowledging him might get them in trouble. For Reginald, it was strange. The same folks who once asked him about the history of his house, the same ones who complimented his magnolia tree in spring, now looked at him like he was part of a brewing storm. But that storm was exactly what Monique wanted. One evening, they sat together at his dining table again, paperwork spread across every inch. The shoebox of letters had been emptied, its contents neatly sorted into files. Monique tapped her pen against one page, her voice sharp with clarity. They've been inflating fines against you for years, Uncle. And look at this. Out of 20 citations issued in the last 3 years, 15 went to homeowners who are black. 15. That's not coincidence. That's discrimination. Reginald shook his head, disbelief and anger mixing in his chest. All this time I thought it was just me. I thought maybe I was being stubborn, not wanting to bend to their rules, but they've been playing a game all along. Monique leaned closer. And it's a game we're going to end. I've already drafted a demand letter. We'll give them the chance to drop the lien voluntarily. If they don't, we take them to court. And Uncle, once we're in court, everything becomes public record. They can't hide anymore. Reginald rubbed his face, his hands trembling slightly. I'm ready, Moni. I just never thought I'd be in a fight like this. I spent my life turning bolts, fixing machines, minding my business. Now here I am, staring down lawyers and presidents of boards. She placed her hand over his. You're not staring them down alone. You've got me, and I promise you, We're going to win. The first direct confrontation came that Friday at another HOA meeting. The community center was more crowded than usual, folding chairs filled with residents buzzing quietly about the conflict. At the front of the room, Linda Haverford adjusted her blazer, clearly prepared for battle. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, tapping the gavel. "Tonight we will address concerns raised by Mr. Porter and his representative." Monique stood, her posture confident, and introduced herself. "I am attorney Monique Ellis, and I represent Mr. Porter. Let's make something clear from the start. Placing a lien on a historic home over arbitrary fines is not only unethical, it's illegal under Georgia state law. This association has selectively enforced its rules, disproportionately targeting certain homeowners, and we intend to prove it." The room erupted in whispers. A few gasps echoed from the back. One neighbor, an older woman named Shirley Conway, raised her hand timidly. I got fined once, too, for painting my porch railing white, but my neighbor painted hers beige, and she never got anything." Others began to murmur in agreement. Linda slammed the gavel. "Order! This meeting is not a courtroom." Monique turned to her, calm but firm. "No, Mrs. Haverford. But it will be. And every document, every inconsistency, every biased fine will be laid bare." Reginald finally stood, his deep voice carrying through the hall. "This isn't just about my shutters or my driveway. This is about my family's home, a home that's been standing longer than this association has existed. You think you can erase 150 years of history with a clipboard and some ink? Not on my watch." The applause that followed surprised even him. Several neighbors clapped, some hesitantly, some with conviction. But Linda's glare burned holes in him. "Mr. Porter," she said coldly, "you are in violation of multiple bylaws, and no amount of theatrics will change that. The lien stands until the balance is paid." Monique smiled faintly. "Then I'll see you in court." It didn't take long for the story to leave the walls of the HOA meeting and spill into the wider community. By Monday morning, a local news station in Savannah ran a short segment. "Retired machinist battles HOA over historic family home." The footage showed Reginald Porter standing on his porch with the old magnolia tree swaying above him. His voice cracked slightly as he told the reporter, "This house is more than wood and brick. It's my family's history. They think they can take it with a lien, but I'm not backing down." Within days, more cameras appeared. A reporter from the Savannah Morning News knocked on his door. A young journalist from a regional online paper called the Coastal Ledger asked to do a sit-down interview with him and his niece, attorney Monique Ellis. Neighbors noticed the vans parked on Magnolia Lane, their satellite dishes pointing skyward, and some began to choose sides more openly. One morning, as Reginald fetched his paper, he overheard a pair of neighbors whispering at the end of the block. "I think the HOA's gone too far," one said. "Maybe," the other replied. "But rules are rules. If he gets away with it, what's next?" Those words stuck with him. To some people, the fight wasn't about his home at all. It was about obedience. At the next HOA meeting, the crowd was nearly double in size. Folding chairs filled the community center, and a few folks stood along the back wall. Reporters weren't allowed inside, but they lingered outside the glass doors with cameras ready. Linda Haverford sat at the head of the table, gavel in hand, her expression steely. "We will proceed as scheduled," she announced. "This is a business meeting, not a circus." But the room buzzed with energy. Several residents demanded to speak, and when Monique rose from her seat, the voices quieted. "My name is Monique Ellis, counsel for Mr. Porter," she began, her tone clear and steady. "We have documented evidence that this board has selectively enforced its bylaws, targeting certain homeowners disproportionately. This is not about lawn heights or paint colors. It's about abuse of power." A hand shot up from the middle row. It was Shirley Conway, the woman who had spoken timidly at the last meeting. Her voice was louder this time. "She's right. I was fined for something my neighbor wasn't, and I paid because I was scared. But now I see I wasn't alone." A man in the back, Gerald Whitman, stood and shook his head. "This is nonsense. The HOA keeps our neighborhood looking sharp. If Mr. Porter gets a pass, then everyone will want one. Next thing you know, property values drop and we all lose." Monique faced him directly. No one is asking for a pass. We're asking for fairness, equal treatment. If the rules truly apply to everyone, then they should apply the same way across the board. But that's not what's happening here. The room erupted again, voices overlapping, some in support, others in protest. Reginald finally stood, raising his hand slightly until the chatter subsided. His voice was deep, calm, but full of emotion. This isn't about keeping yards neat or keeping houses in line. My house has stood for 150 years. It's older than this association, older than most of us in this room. My parents taught me that a home is a legacy. You don't sell it, and you don't let someone take it from you because of greed or pettiness. I'm not asking anyone to fight my fight, but I'm not moving, and I'm not paying a dime for made-up violations. Applause broke out, louder this time, more sustained. Linda banged the gavel repeatedly, her voice rising. Order! This is not acceptable. The fines are valid. The lien is valid. And this discussion is over. But the discussion was far from over. The following week, Monique filed the official lawsuit on behalf of her uncle. The paperwork cited discriminatory practices, selective enforcement, and violation of state property laws. News crews returned, now with brighter lights and longer interviews. Some neighbors approached Reginald on the sidewalk to thank him. Others avoided eye contact altogether. The neighborhood felt divided down the middle, supporters on one side, loyalists to the HOA on the other. One evening, a young couple from 2 streets over knocked on his door. Mr. Porter, the woman said nervously, we saw you on the news. We've been fined 3 times for things we didn't even know were violations. If you need us to testify, we will. Reginald glanced at Monique, who nodded. Every voice helps, she told them. As more stories surfaced, the case began to feel bigger than just one man's house. It was about every family that had been pushed around by rules that seemed designed to break rather than protect them. Reginald sat on his porch one evening, the sun sinking low over the rooftops. He thought about his father's words, about the house being an anchor. He realized now that anchor wasn't just holding his family steady. It was holding an entire community together, showing them that resistance was possible. But the louder the story became, the more desperate Linda grew, and desperate people rarely play fair. By the time the lawsuit was officially filed in the Chatham County Courthouse, the neighborhood felt like a stage. Everyone seemed to know their role, some cheering Reginald on, others whispering warnings about crossing the HOA, and at the center of it all was Linda Haverford, determined not to lose control of what she believed was her territory. The morning Monique filed the complaint, Reginald went with her to the courthouse. He wore his best suit, one he hadn't put on since his retirement party years earlier. As they walked up the courthouse steps, cameras flashed. A reporter called out, Mr. Porter, how do you feel about taking on the HOA? He paused, glanced at Monique, then looked straight into the camera. I feel like I don't have a choice. If I don't fight for my home, nobody else will. And I'm not letting them erase my family's history. Inside, the paperwork was stamped, filed, and suddenly the fight was no longer just neighborhood gossip. It was a matter of public record. That evening, back at the house, Monique spread fresh documents across the table. Her laptop screen glowed with highlighted lines from the HOA bylaws. Uncle, she said, pointing at one section, their rules allow fines, but they can't exceed $100 per violation unless approved by a vote of the community. Did they ever hold a vote before fining you thousands? Reginald frowned. Not once. Half these neighbors don't even know what's going on until they get a bill in the mail. Monique smirked. Exactly. They've been making up numbers as they go. That's going to look terrible in front of a judge. He leaned back in his chair, letting out a low whistle. So, all those big envelopes they sent me, half of it wasn't even legal? Not even close, Monique said. As the case gained momentum, more neighbors came forward. A retired teacher named Dorothy Banks told Monique how she'd been fined for having flower pots on her porch, pots she'd kept there for 20 years without issue. A younger couple, Marcus and Elise Franklin, admitted they'd quietly paid nearly $3,000 in fines for a supposed fence violation. Each story added weight to the lawsuit. Monique began drafting affidavits, organizing testimony, and piecing together a narrative that painted the HOA not as a guardian of property values, but as a bully hiding behind bylaws. Meanwhile, Linda gathered her own allies. At one board meeting, she sat flanked by two other members, her tone sharp and commanding. "We cannot let this lawsuit destroy us," she declared. "If we lose, our authority is gone. Do you want every homeowner painting their houses whatever color they want? Do you want weeds, junk cars, chaos? This lawsuit is not about one man. It's about the survival of this association." One board member, Harold Green, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "But Linda, if what they're saying is true—" She cut him off with a glare. "If what they're saying is true, then we lose everything, so we fight. Hard." The board nodded reluctantly, but cracks were beginning to show. Back at Reginald's house, Monique coached him for depositions. "They'll try to rattle you, Uncle. They'll ask why you ignored notices, why you didn't just repaint or narrow the driveway. You need to be firm, but calm. Explain that you weren't ignoring them. You were protecting your rights." Reginald rubbed his chin. "Calm, huh? You know that's not my strong suit when someone's coming for my house." Monique smiled softly. "Think of it like welding, Uncle. Steady hands, steady heat. If you rush or let anger take over, the weld breaks. Same thing here," he chuckled. "You always did know how to talk sense into me." The first legal skirmish came quickly. The HOA filed a motion to dismiss, claiming Reginald's claims were baseless and exaggerated. Monique countered with a thick binder of evidence: photos, letters, records of selective fines. The judge scheduled a hearing. On the day of the hearing, Reginald walked into the courtroom beside his niece. His palms were sweaty, but his stride was steady. Across the aisle, Linda sat stiffly with her attorney, her lips pressed into a thin line. When the judge entered and the arguments began, Reginald realized something important. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who had been silenced, fined, or bullied into submission. And for the first time since the notices began, he felt a sense of power, not because he was winning yet, but because he was finally being heard. But hearings are only the beginning, and as the case moved forward, the neighborhood itself would turn into a battlefield, with neighbors forced to choose sides in a conflict that refused to stay quiet. The lawsuit transformed Magnolia Lane into something Reginald had never imagined: a dividing line. On one side were neighbors who stopped by with words of encouragement, sometimes dropping off casseroles or sweet tea like it was the old days when community meant support. On the other side were those who crossed the street rather than pass his house, muttering that he was stirring up trouble. The tension came to a head one warm Thursday evening at a neighborhood block gathering. The event was supposed to be light-hearted, tables lined with lemonade, kids running through sprinklers, but it quickly morphed into a showdown. Reginald had been reluctant to attend, but Monique urged him. "If you don't show up, they'll say you're hiding. Better to stand in the open." So he went, wearing a simple polo shirt and jeans, nodding politely as he carried a plate of potato salad from one table to another. At first, the conversations were cordial. A couple of older women asked him about the history of his house. A young father thanked him for standing up to the nonsense. But then came the voice of Gerald Whitman, the man who'd defended the HOA at the last meeting. "You know, Porter, you could have avoided all this if you just followed the rules like the rest of us." The chatter quieted instantly. Reginald set down his plate and faced him. "Rules aren't the problem, Gerald. Rules applied unfairly are the problem. I've lived here longer than most folks on this block. You think my shutters suddenly became illegal last year? Or my driveway grew overnight?" Gerald snorted. "Maybe you just don't like being told what to do." Before Reginald could reply, Shirley Conway stepped forward, her voice shaking but strong. "That's not fair, Gerald. You know as well as I do the board looks the other way for some people. I got fined while my neighbor didn't, and it was the exact same thing. I paid because I was scared. But Mr. Porter has the courage to fight." A few people clapped softly. Others shifted uncomfortably. The block party's cheerful tone was gone. Monique, who had been standing nearby, spoke up. "This lawsuit isn't just about my uncle. It's about fairness. If the HOA truly wanted order, they'd enforce their rules evenly. But they don't. And the evidence shows it. Linda herself hadn't come to the block party, but her presence lingered like a shadow. Her allies muttered in defense of the board, warning that if Reginald won, the neighborhood would fall apart. Property values, uniformity, and order were their buzzwords. That night, as Reginald and Monique walked home, porch lights flicked on along the street, neighbors peeking out like spectators after a boxing match. Reginald shook his head. Feels like folks are being forced to choose sides. Monique glanced at him. They are, and that's not a bad thing. The more this community speaks, the harder it'll be for Linda to hide behind her title. The next morning, the community division reached a boiling point. A flyer appeared in every mailbox, unsigned but clearly drafted by HOA loyalists. It read, "Do you want chaos in our neighborhood? Do you want falling property values? Stand with the HOA. Say no to those who defy the rules." By afternoon, a counter-flyer circulated, this one with signatures. "Fairness matters. Stop selective enforcement. Support Mr. Porter." Reginald sat on his porch reading both flyers, shaking his head. "Never thought my shutters would start a war," he muttered. Later that week, a local TV crew showed up to film interviews with neighbors. Some spoke passionately about Reginald's fight for fairness. Others warned of troublemakers undermining the HOA. The tension even seeped into everyday errands. At the grocery store, Reginald overheard two women debating loudly near the produce section. "Well, if he doesn't like the rules, he should move," one said. "Move? From a house his family's owned for 150 years? You sound ridiculous." The other shot back. He kept walking, pretending not to notice, but every word pressed against him like a weight. That evening, Monique sat beside him on the porch. The magnolia tree rustled above them, and the cicadas filled the silence. "Uncle, you realize this isn't just a legal case anymore. It's a community reckoning. People are waking up, and not just here. News outlets from Atlanta and even Jacksonville are calling me." Reginald sighed. "I didn't ask for all this. I just wanted to keep my house." Monique smiled softly. "And sometimes fighting for what's yours shines a light for others too afraid to speak. That's how change happens." He looked out at the street, now quiet but simmering with tension, and nodded slowly. "If that's the role I've been handed, then so be it." But the pressure was building on the other side too, and Linda was about to learn that the power she once wielded without question was slipping through her fingers. For years, Linda Haverford carried herself like the queen of Magnolia Lane. She walked through the neighborhood with a clipboard tucked under her arm, issuing notices with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. People grumbled, but few dared to confront her. She had built her authority carefully, strict rules, tight alliances, and just enough intimidation to keep everyone in line. But power built on fear rarely lasts when people stop being afraid. The lawsuit cracked her image. At first, Linda tried to dismiss it, telling neighbors the case was frivolous and would be thrown out. "He'll lose in court," she said confidently during a board meeting. "We've followed procedure to the letter." Yet behind closed doors, she was rattled. At a late-night emergency board meeting, she slammed a binder onto the table. "Do you realize what happens if this gets traction? If Porter wins, every homeowner we've fined will come crawling out of the woodwork demanding refunds. We'll be bankrupt." Her vice president, Harold Green, shifted in his seat. "Maybe they should, Linda. Some of those fines never sat right with me." Linda's face flushed crimson. "Are you turning on me too, Harold? After everything I've done to keep this community in order?" Another board member, Samantha Lee, spoke up quietly. "It's not about order anymore. It's about fairness. And from what I've seen in those records, Monique Ellis has us dead to rights." Linda's chair screeched against the tile as she stood. "Cowards. The lot of you. You wouldn't have the courage to keep this place together if I weren't here." Her voice echoed in the small room, but the silence that followed was louder. For the first time, her board members weren't nodding in agreement. They were staring at the table, avoiding her gaze. Meanwhile, outside the boardroom, things were unraveling fast. The local news published an exposé on the HOA's practices, complete with charts showing disproportionate fines against black homeowners. The headline read, "Selective Enforcement? Magnolia Lane. HOA faces discrimination." Lawsuit. The backlash was immediate. Residents flooded the association's phone lines, demanding answers. Some posted on community forums, blasting the board for abusing power. Others began organizing their own meetings, calling for new leadership. Reginald watched it all unfold with a mixture of relief and disbelief. Sitting on his porch one evening, he saw groups of neighbors stopping in front of his house, not to glare or whisper, but to thank him. "Mr. Porter," one man said, holding his young daughter's hand, "we don't have the courage to take them on ourselves, but you gave us hope. Thank you." The words stirred something in him. For weeks, he'd felt like a target, weighed down by fines and threats. Now, for the first time, he felt like a leader. Linda, however, was spiraling. She tried rallying her remaining supporters, warning that chaos was coming if the HOA lost control. But the more she spoke, the weaker her authority seemed. At the next community meeting, when she pounded the gavel and declared, "The lien against Mr. Porter stands," half the room erupted in boos. Monique stood calmly, folder in hand. "Not for long," she said, handing copies of the lawsuit to anyone who wanted them. "This isn't just about one house. It's about ending abuse. And the court will see that the shift in the room was undeniable. Where once Linda commanded silence, now the crowd murmured against her. Even Janice, the secretary who had always sat quietly by her side, looked away instead of nodding in agreement. A week later, the State Attorney General's office announced a preliminary investigation into the HOA's practices. Local reporters swarmed Linda's front lawn, shoving microphones at her as she tried to retreat into her house. Her once pristine reputation crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny. Inside her home, Linda sat at her kitchen table, staring at the same kind of notices she had once so casually issued. Only this time, the words weren't about, but the fight wasn't fully over. The court still had to rule, and the final chapter of this battle would decide whether Reginald's family home truly remained safe for generations to come. The day of the final court hearing arrived with the same weight as a storm. Reginald woke early, long before the sun climbed over Savannah's rooftops. He stood on his porch with a cup of coffee, staring at the magnolia tree that had stood watch for generations. Today, he thought, would decide whether his family's anchor remained firmly in the ground or was ripped away by a clipboard and signatures. Monique arrived dressed in a navy suit, her hair pulled back neatly, her expression calm but determined. "You ready, Uncle?" she asked as she stepped onto the porch. Reginald managed a smile. "As ready as I'll ever be. Let's go finish this." The courthouse buzzed with quiet tension. Rows of benches filled with neighbors, reporters, and even a few curious strangers who'd followed the story from the beginning. At one table sat Reginald and Monique, side by side, their folders stacked neatly. Across the aisle, Linda Haverford sat stiffly with her attorney, her once sharp confidence dulled by weeks of public backlash. The judge, an older man with reading glasses perched on the edge of his nose, called the case to order. Monique rose first, her voice steady as she presented evidence. Photographs of houses in clear violation of the same rules Reginald had been fined for, records showing drastically inflated penalties, testimonies from neighbors like Shirley Conway and Dorothy Banks. Each piece of evidence stacked higher and higher, like bricks forming a wall around Linda's crumbling defense. When it was Linda's turn, her attorney argued the association had merely enforced its bylaws in the interest of property values. But the words felt hollow. Too many residents had seen too much. The judge's expression gave away little, but the courtroom sensed the imbalance, one side speaking with receipts and testimonies, the other clinging to vague justifications. Finally, the judge cleared his throat. "I have reviewed the evidence carefully. It is clear this association engaged in selective enforcement of its rules, disproportionately and unfairly burdening Mr. Porter. The lien against his property is void. Furthermore, the association is ordered to refund improperly levied fines and submit to a full independent audit of its practices." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Reginald closed his eyes, exhaling deeply. Monique squeezed his hand, whispering, "We did it, Uncle." "It's over." Across the aisle, Linda slumped in her chair, her face pale. She didn't look at anyone, not even the board members who had once propped her up. The gavel came down, and with it, the end of her reign. Outside, the courthouse steps turned into a press conference. Cameras crowded around Reginald as he stood with Monique. He spoke simply, his voice carrying the strength of generations. "This house wasn't just mine. It was my family's. My father, my grandfather, they all lived there, worked for it, and passed it down. I wasn't going to let anyone take that away. If there's one thing I hope people take from this, it's that you don't have to bow to bullies, no matter what title they hold." Neighbors who had once been silent now clapped openly, some even cheering. Shirley Conway stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "You saved more than your house, Mr. Porter. You saved all of us from living in fear." That night, back on the porch, Reginald sat with Monique again. The magnolia tree swayed gently, its leaves whispering in the breeze. He looked at her with pride. "Your grandfather always said this house was our anchor. Turns out he was right. It kept us steady when everything tried to knock us down." Monique smiled. "And now it's more than an anchor. It's a symbol. You showed people they could stand up too." Reginald nodded, his heart finally at peace. "Then maybe this old house still has a few more stories left to tell." The fight had been grueling, full of fear, anger, and nights of doubt. But in the end, truth held firm. A home that had withstood storms, wars, and time itself had survived yet another test. And with it came a lesson. When you protect your legacy, you protect the future for those who come after you. To everyone listening to this story, remember, the fight for what's right isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. If you believe in something, stand firm. And if you value stories like this one, make sure to subscribe so we can share more journeys that remind us of the power of resilience.